Oh man, we are ready for episode 5 of Hanging with Daddy. It is week 7. And I know what you're thinking. Hey, I got to set my lineups. And I literally don't have a person with 2 legs that isn't on a bye to plug into my running back position. So you came to the right place because we aren't going to talk about any of that. We're going to have a couple of drinks and we're going to talk to literally the coolest guy in the fantasy space. You do not get cooler than our guest tonight. And what else is cool? Our intro. So I want you to sit back, listen to Gabe, and then I will bring our guest out. We're going to have some fun tonight. Get ready because Bipocalypse episode is coming right at you right after this.
Get down. Turn on the pod cause we looking at live right now. Peeling it back, take a quick look inside up. All of these analysts, daddy gon' handle this. Know he's a baddie, I know he ain't bad at this. We gon' lay back, talking irrelevance. Why do all that? Just for the hell of it. Hanging with daddy. What's the vibe though? Late night vibes. Oh. Hanging with daddy. What's up, Mike? Turn it on right now. I got the remote now. Hanging with daddy. Let's go. Late night vibes. And we're hanging with daddy. Turn up. Turn it on right now. Daddy got control now.
Say it every week. It is the most fire intro there is on any podcast. Gabe absolutely crushes that one. Gets stuck in my head. Always dancing, always partying when we start off this show. But I could not be more excited tonight. I just couldn't. I had the honor of meeting this man in Canton. I've been friends with them for a little over a year now. And this guy is everywhere. And it's because there is not a person you are going to find in this fantasy space that does not love this man. He is literally the coolest person I know, the easiest person to vibe with. So we had to bring him on Late Night Vibing. We had to bring him on this show. You could not have Late Night Vibing without the coolest dude in the fantasy space. He's on 4 for 4. He's on NBC Edge. He is on Footballguys, and he is now a part of the new 32-bit project with Marcus G, Robbie from Rum Boys, Hughes, LQ, Mike Floro. You can find them all at the number 30, the word 2, and the word bit. This man is a known home brewer. And like I said, just a dude that you love. You have to love this guy. A weather expert, a fantasy expert, just the greatest dude I know. Let's bring him out here. Chris Allen. What's up, my man?
Yo, I mean, this is way too much, man. It's way too much. I mean, you keep all the whole time I'm sitting back here listening to you say the coolest dude or whatever. I'm like, man, there's no way this man can be talking about me, man. But I appreciate you bringing me on, Mike. And like you mentioned beforehand, it was so great to finally get a chance to sit down and have a meal together, some drinks together, like while we were all up in Canton. And I mean, I've been talking with folks about our time at the expo. I mean, since I got back, almost immediately after I got back, just because the entire vibe with the whole community being there, nothing but positivity. I mean, nothing but just good laughs, good discussions, and being able to also hear about this project, like while we were talking in Canton and seeing this come to life and seeing how well you've been able to get these big name guests. I mean, from Troy all the way down. I mean, bringing me on as well. So it's just, man, I'm so happy we get a chance to sit down again. So, I mean, I appreciate you for letting me come by.
Oh man, it has been a build up to this. Like I keep bringing on a bigger and bigger guest. So Troy opening for you made a lot of sense. It made perfect sense. You know what I mean? Like he's all right. Like he's okay.
Yeah. I mean, Troy, he's all right. I mean, if you want to talk about one of like the biggest names in fantasy right now, I mean, verified celebrity Troy. I'm sure he's gonna wind up, chirping in our group thread like after he hears this. But no, man, I'm just happy to be included in these wonderful guests that you've got on, man. But what we got cooking for tonight, though?
Oh, we're going to have some fun tonight because Twitter is wilding right now. Like Twitter is on fire. And there were 2 things that stuck out to me that I've been reading that I'm losing my mind over. But I want to get to the first one because we have a lot of time to talk about, what is it, Bipocalypse or what do they call Bimageddon? I think people are giving it all sorts of names for what's happening in week 7. But we're gonna get to that. But the first thing I wanted to get to is I have people that follow me, and you know a Venn diagram where you have two circles and you kind of bring them together and you talk about where the convergences are.
Yeah.
Well, I have two completely separate circles, and those circles are A, people who follow me on Twitter, and B, people would have a chance in hell at tackling Derrick Henry. And yet I am seeing people telling me that out of 100 chances of tackling Derrick Henry, that they might get one, they might get five. I saw a man say 30 to 40 out of 100. 30 to 40 of a one-on-one drill with Derrick Henry.
I don't believe that. I don't believe that.
Not a chance. Now,
Not
I
a
can tell you, we've met, right? And, I'm a decent-sized person, a former safety. I give myself zero chance. I don't care if it's 100, 1,000. I am not getting Derrick Henry to the ground once. I am a very realistic human being. He's not tripping over me. I'm not grabbing his ankle. It's just not going to happen. But I wanted to hear from you. 100 chances at tackling Derrick Henry. How are we doing? How are you feeling about this? What would happen if he gave a run at you? What are you going to do?
Look, man, I'm 38 years old with a semi-bad back and, knee and ankle problems. I mean, y'all say 100 attempts. I don't even need one attempt because I'm not trying. That man plows into me at what? 220, 230 pounds and can run as fast as he can. We watched him last night. Dude was pulling away from safeties and corners. That makes no sense. So if he gets at least not even a full head of steam, not even a half head of steam, that man can take like 4 or 5 steps and then run in my direction. There is no chance that I'm even making an attempt at tackling Derrick Henry at my age. Even when I was younger, I wouldn't imagine trying to go up against that man. Like my body, my body, soul, and everything that it comes with, my being would completely turn to dust if Derrick Henry were to be running in my particular direction. So no, I don't want that business. I don't want that smoke. If he's running at me, I'm running in the opposite direction. Like I'm not even going to try doing that. So no, I mean, I don't want any of that. Like in my, I don't even want to try and I don't even want to try and visualize that. So unless whoever this man was that was saying that he could get him 30 or 40 times, unless that was I don't know, Derrick Henry's brother, if he has a brother, I don't even know if he's got a brother, but I don't know, or maybe he thought that he could have some sort of special rules where he might have, a bat or a weapon of some sort in order to take him down. But I'm not, there's just no way that I could even consider being out in the field in pads and a helmet with Derrick Henry moving in my general direction. It's just not happening.
No, and I think that's fair, and I think that's what most sane people would think. I mean, I got trucked by D3 high school kids. This is Derrick Henry.
Yeah.
We played against some bigger kids, but nothing that ever amounted to anything. And now you're talking about the beast of a human being that we haven't seen the likes of probably since, and we were just talking about a guy on the timeline like a Christian Okoye type player. Another guy you're not getting in front of. Don't bother. It ain't going to happen. But realistically, I don't think people realize that even if you had, if when you look at the Oklahoma drills, you can't go too far wide. You could take these scat backs, like a Dion Lewis type back, a JJ Taylor type back, and they are going to run our old asses over.
Yeah.
Derrick Henry.
It's even worse with him.
Yeah. It's not whether you're going to get trucked, it's how bad. But I can't think of a single player in the NFL, save for Rodrigo Blankenship, maybe, that I would take down any times out of 100. I would just end up going on my back over and over again, I assume.
Maybe Tom Brady. I think that might be the only person in the league that I would challenge to try and attempt some sort of tackle against if he happened to be moving in my general direction. But any running back, anybody that has it's not just about the power, but it's also about the form. I mean, you got to think about how long these running backs have been in the league, from essentially Pop Warner all the way up to where they're at in the professional leagues, of how to, brace their body for the incoming impact of hitting another human being, of essentially creating a car crash of an event that's going to hit your body, and then also being able to bounce off said collision in order to keep on going. Like they've been trained to take on these sorts of hits for decades for most of these guys that have now been playing in the league, or at least in other leagues for quite some time. So to assume that you, just a regular person, can just run up and try and even attempt some sort of form tackle, no. And for Derrick Henry specifically, brother that looks like he comes from Wakanda, absolutely not. I want nothing. I want nothing to do with that. Like, no, thank you.
And I think that is the perfect response. I don't even know how to add to just no thank you is the right response. So while we're on the subject of running backs, right now we are in a situation. We are in a dire situation in the fantasy community in week 7. We have how many bye weeks? One of my favorites right now, Najee Harris on bye. I know my backup for Najee Harris in one of my leagues, Zach Moss, on a bye. We couple that with the fact that Kareem Hunt comes up late, calf injury. Christian McCaffrey moved to IR. Saquon Barkley isn't playing. Chris Carson is out. Alex Collins, Chris Carson's replacement, comes up with an ankle injury heading into overtime of the game. David Montgomery, the list goes on and on.
Right.
And what did it lead us to? It led us to a time frame where we are going to trip over the same human being that we laughed about spending fab on last year. Everybody's going for D'Ernest Johnson this week. Tell me you're not in on this. How are you feeling about D'Ernest Johnson getting another chance from the fantasy community he burned last year?
I can't buy into it. And this is nothing against D'Ernest Johnson or Demetric Felton, like for that matter. It's not really about the talent of the players themselves, but it's the situations that they're likely going to find themselves in. Because remember, they're playing on a short week this week. They've got the Thursday night game against Denver. Now, that situation by itself, not the best. I mean, Denver's shown at least to be able to put up a decent amount of pressure. That defensive front is still decent enough to limit running backs, at least to cap their ceilings. You might be able to get a decent floor depending on the talent of said running back, but at the very least, we're not expecting a 100-yard, 2-touchdown game out of anybody that's going up against them. But also, we got to look at that offense as a whole. It's not just the fact that Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt are now out, but it's also Baker Mayfield playing with a busted shoulder while he's expected to play, even though he probably shouldn't at this point. But either way, he's expected to play. So what's that offense going to look like? Jarvis Landry isn't expected back, or at least that's the last that I heard. Odell Beckham also nursing an injury. So it's just, what is that situation going to look like for the Cleveland Browns on Thursday night? And if we can't even get ourselves behind the Cleveland offense as a whole, like what's that offensive yards per drive going to look like? I mean, I can see just a number of 3-and-outs from them, and it just being a slow-paced, low-scoring type of game. So why would you want to invest your fab money into either the backs that are going to be ending it? I know that the age-old adage for running backs, at least for fantasy purposes, has been, volume is king. Volume is king. Volume is king. But even if we're getting that type of volume from either of these backs, I mean, Felton might be getting more of the passing work. So in PPR, that might work for you. D'Ernest Johnson might also mix into the passing game. So maybe a few targets here and there might also work for you. But again, if that Cleveland Browns offense is nowhere near close to 100%, we can't even expect the same level of production as we've seen in weeks past. Why would we expect to see even more, or at least enough to provide us a floor when they're playing on Thursday night? I can just see so many folks that wind up winning them off of waivers tonight, and they wind up starting them on Thursday, and they're left staring at 6, 7, 8 points until Sunday morning. And it's just, is that really something that you want to invest in when they're possibly, I mean, depends on where you're at. I mean, if you're sitting in a deeper league, that might be your only option. But in some other situations and some other players that might be available on the waiver wire, you might be best looking elsewhere.
So what it reminds me of is, you remember last year, Josh Jacobs goes down and people start getting in on Devontae Booker, not realizing that they're playing the Jets. And the Jets had one of the best front sevens in the league. You could pass on them all day. They couldn't cover a tight end worth a lick, but you couldn't run on the Jets.
Right.
And everybody goes all in, DFS. everything is Devontae Booker, and he puts up an 11 for 35 or whatever it was, and that's what I see here. But there is one guy, and I want to take you back in the time machine. You can see our vibe is kind of old school. Everything about this show is old school. So this pickup to me, and the guy that I am going for, that I never thought I would say this name again this week, is Devonta Freeman.
Hey, all right. I can actually get behind that. So
Right?
what are your thoughts on Freeman before I start rambling?
So my thoughts are pretty simple. Latavius Murray goes down with an injury. Not certain that he's going to suit up, right? So when you take what they've been doing when they're throwing all this crap up against the wall and what has proven to have been a plug-and-play offense for the running back, I mean, Lamar Jackson is going to basically take up 2 or 3 linebackers on every single play. So this team is going to run the ball. That's their identity. That's what they do. And everybody who has stepped into this lineup has been able to produce, Freeman included, in his limited work.
Sure.
Now you consolidate into one running back. A running back who's proven to have a little bit of giddy up in his career, has the hands to be able to make a couple catches if need be. It feels like the perfect situation where I am at a loss for a player, and this floor to me feels relatively high. Like this feels like a guy who could walk into an 8-point game with the potential of hitting that 15 to 20 based on catches and touchdowns, because this team is the exact opposite of what you were just outlining with the Cleveland Browns. With the outside of the fact that Ronnie Staley just went down with an injury, you have an outstanding offensive line. You have a quarterback who's pulling people away. And now you have a running back who realistically is not going to be the focal point of the defense that I think might get loose. But how are you feeling about old school, old man Devonta Freeman maybe stepping into the spotlight again?
He already did kind of step into the spotlight, if not just on Sunday, but actually the week prior to, in week 5, when it was just it was Latavius Murray, Devonta Freeman, and Tyson Williams like active for the Ravens. Actually, Devonta Freeman was second on the team for a second for all the running backs in terms of routes run. We saw him getting targets while they were trying to come back during that game against the Colts. And so now we see that continued work coming for Devonta Freeman last week. And now while he didn't have any targets against the Chargers, he didn't really need to because they were essentially blowing them out throughout most of the game. But if that continued trust in that offense works and that rotation continues to work for Lamar Jackson as well, I can totally see him at least being able to not all the way turn back the clock, but for the most part, he looked like he still got some juice in his legs. Now, is that going to be the case for, we're in week 7 now, so we got over 10 weeks left, so about 2.5 to, close to 3 months left in the season. Now, am I expecting that to be the case from now until the end of the regular season? No. But at the very least, for over these next few weeks when the bye weeks are heaviest, yeah, why not? You can plug him in as an RB2 type of flex type of play, especially in PPR leagues where you get that added bonus for receptions, which we can already see him being a larger part of the passing game, which Lamar Jackson has become even more deadly as a passer, which some folks didn't really expect to see. Not too bad for a running back, but still. I think that's where things are headed for Devonta Freeman so far. But so yeah, I'm 100% behind that pick. And while it might look gross, but we see that BAL, next to Devonta Freeman, where he's at right now versus the situation he's been in the past. So I think that's at least a decent pickup and a good bench stash for right now.
I love it. And to everybody in my fishbowl division, this show does not come out until Thursday. So sorry, if we were live, you would have been able to cash in on this. But since we're not, you'll see what's going to happen tomorrow when waivers run. Anybody you're looking at, is there any kind of weird name, anything you want to get weird about with the Bipocalypse week? Anybody you're throwing out that you never thought was going to see your lineup?
A couple of dudes that I wasn't necessarily think would see my lineup, but 2 names. Daryl Williams has probably already been picked up in most of everybody's league. If he's available, let's go ahead and snatch him up. We saw what he's capable of doing this past week. Now, I would caution or at least caveat some of Daryl Williams' work. He does wind up with 23, 24 PPR points, but I want to say half of them came on 2 short yardage touchdowns. Now, it's great that they're giving him the opportunity the thing that we really wanted Clyde Edwards-Helaire to get. But I would say that it's entirely possible that while he winds up with those 2 short touchdowns this week, he winds up getting 24 points this week. Next week, we're left holding the bag where he has, just 60 yards and, no touchdowns, something along those lines. So if he was out there, if he's still available, if you got one of those like short bench leagues where some folks haven't really made that type of decision yet, go ahead and snatch him up. I think he's worth adding. Khalil Herbert for the Bears. I mean, my goodness. I mean, did you get a chance to watch that game against the Packers? Oh my gosh. I mean, Khalil Herbert, while he was I think a 6th-round pick, if I'm remembering correctly, out of Virginia Tech. I think that was correct. But either way, I mean, that dude, like, he actually has, like, he's got some juice. I mean, not going to lie to you. I think I was hearing on a couple of different podcasts. I think it was like Chris Harris's podcast earlier today. And then also Matt Waldman's talked about him a couple of times. The comparison that I think Matt Waldman gave for him was, oh man, I can't even remember. I think between the two of them, the comp that they gave was actually Aaron Jones, like just the smooth shiftiness and being able, and that burst that Herbert was able to show this past week against the Packers. I mean, he he pops like when you watch him on tape. And the fact that the Chicago Bears, like, since they use more of a zone blocking scheme, which really works for a one cut like type of runner like Herbert, which is the same type of runner that David Montgomery is, he kind of fits a bit better than Damian Williams, who's more of a gap runner. I mean, which is why he was so prolific in the Kansas City Chiefs offense. And he's been fine in Chicago, but he just doesn't have the same juice that he did when he was in Kansas City. But either way, Khalil Herbert is another guy that while he's able to get into the paint twice, only one counted because I think there was a penalty on his second touchdown, also being used as both a runner and a pass catcher out of the backfield. So, I mean, he's got RB1 traits. Now, we'll see what happens when Damian Williams comes back and then ultimately when David Montgomery comes back. But my goodness, I mean, if you can go ahead, and I would honestly suggest, like, this is for like the Dynasty folks, like, since it's part of the things that I do nowadays, but for folks with a Dynasty lean, if you can go ahead and throw out a trade for him right now, I would honestly do that as quickly as possible. See if you can wind up snatching him up, because I can only see an increase in his value, like, moving forward as Justin Fields gets better. Damian Williams like phases out of the offense, if not this year, after this year, because I'm assuming he's not going to be a part of the team in 2022. So like Herbert is definitely a guy that's on my radar, not just for this season or the short-term part of this season, but definitely like moving forward, because that dude can play.
Man, I love that call out. And it's funny, we were talking about him earlier, but in watching Khalil Herbert, and a guy admittedly that I did not see looking as good the week before as he did this week, and going back and watching it again, I missed some things. And you're right, what he has is that one cut. He slides out as you see the line moving left. He sees the seam and hits it with no hesitation, which is amazing. And the guy that I saw, and I love the Aaron Jones comp, but the guy that I saw is honestly, just to kind of tie it all back together, he did look like a younger Devonta Freeman to me. He looked like the Atlanta Falcons Devonta Freeman. The way he runs, the way his shoulders are moving, like, I was looking at it going, dang, this kid absolutely is earned some run. And I think that Damian Williams, to be quite honest, if he comes back, is going to be an afterthought with this team if he even makes it the entire season on the roster. I mean, he was an insurance policy that seems like they didn't need. So I absolutely love that call out. I was off on him. And admittedly, I was wrong watching him this week. I was like, wow, this kid's got something. And
yeah, he's definitely the real deal. Better. And I think that's the right call about what Damian Williams' outlook is going to be for the rest of the season, because he absolutely was an injury insurance policy for the Chicago Bears should something happen to David Montgomery. Lo and behold, it does. And they are forced into putting Damian Williams into a timeshare with Herbert. But even remember in that first game, like where Damian Williams and Khalil Herbert played, Herbert essentially, like, he almost outplayed him. I mean, from a production standpoint, it was great to see Damian Williams also like getting into the paint. But I mean, Herbert, I honestly wound up like they had a similar touch share. Herbert had 60, 70 yards or 80 yards or something close to that. So it's just, we already saw Herbert being able to produce, and that was when the two were together. So at the very least, like once Damian Williams comes back, I'm assuming that's going to be for this week. I'm guessing he'll be activated off the COVID list, but we'll see what happens because he did test positive. I don't know about his vaccination status, but either way, even when he does come back at some point, at the very least, I can assume that Herbert is the 1A to Damian Williams 1B, or at the or best case scenario for Herbert, he winds up just being the primary workload, and then Damian Williams essentially just mixes in, similar to how he was backing up David Montgomery.
Absolutely. And that's the second point is where I'm seeing it. And again, the problem is trying to predict Matt Nagy, and he has shown to be fairly incompetent at times. So
absolutely.
So what I did want to talk about, and I could talk football with you for hours. We never get bored talking football, but I do want to talk about some of the other things you have going on, and particularly homebrewing. I know this has been something you've been doing for a little while. What got you into it, and how is that going? Are you like ramping up for the winter? Give me some of the idea of like what you are brewing for yourself right now, and how it's working out for you.
Yeah, I've been doing homebrewing for 10, 11, 12 years, like somewhere in there. And it was more of just a thing to get together with some of my buddies and like in their families for us to kick it on a Saturday or Sunday, get the families together, have the kids like play outside, and for us to just kind of, BS in the garage, like while we're all brewing together. And it's kind of like morphed into, something that I do as, I don't know, like have like some form of competition. I do brewing competitions at least once a year. And like at least have a chance to meet other home brewers like outside of just my little circle of folks that I know here in the Dayton, Ohio area. But I think it's a ton of fun because I don't get like super like snobbish. Like, please don't nobody get me wrong. Like, while I do enjoy IPAs, and I know most folks like roll their eyes when somebody says that their favorite style of beer is IPAs. That's just my personal flavor. I mean, that's just my personal taste. I mean, you are completely 100% liable to come by my house and see me, drinking either like, what is it? Like King Cobra or something like that. I mean, there's no, I'm not above any of like the beers that most folks could buy at a gas station for about 70 or 80 cents. Like it's just that's just me. I mean, I will drink a good beer or even a bad beer from time to time. But for homebrewing specifically, especially nowadays, actually not nowadays, but this time of year, we're getting into the fall. I do have a pumpkin beer that I put together. It's actually sitting in the kegerator, which is about like 10 feet in that direction for me, like right now. But I've got that like sitting in the keg right now, ready to serve that here within the next week or so. I'm putting together a stout recipe, probably like a coffee chocolate stout, like somewhere like something like that, with maybe like a graham cracker, like a taste to it as well. But yeah, I think that's the reason why I like doing it, is because you can think about the types of flavors and the types of taste profiles that you would like from a beer. And then knowing how to homebrew, you can start putting together recipes that can create that flavor profile that you like. So like myself, I like IPAs, or my specific type of IPAs, either West Coast IPAs or like hazy IPAs. So the ones that have like maybe, decent in the ABV category, so like 5-6%, because I'm kind of old. I don't like drinking all that stuff that's like high octane that's going to knock you out after two drinks, or like 2 beers or whatever. But I do like the fruity aromas, like the fruity flavors and so on and so forth. So I've always tried to like reverse engineer how you can create that flavor profile, how you can create a beer that just looks good. Like if you pull up hazy IPAs, just like search on Google for hazy IPAs, and any of those pictures, you got that nice like orange color that almost looks like a fruit in a glass, something like that. And that's what I want to try and create, because at least when I do when I do make beers, I do believe like and it's almost like for food, like for eating food in general, like we eat with our eyes. You see a nice steak, you see like a salmon that's been smoked or something like that. It's almost like you want to eat that thing and you're just looking at it. Same thing with beer. Like if you see a nice color, like a nice, like the beer has like a nice tint to it, got a thick head sitting in the glass. It's just like, it looks like something that you would want to drink. And that's what I like creating. So that's why I kind of got into it. And that's how my interest in it has morphed over the years, because I want to create things that I like to drink. And so in doing so, it's just gotten like more and more, I guess, scientific per se, because I do keep a journal with all of the things that I've done, like how I create a beer, like what type of grains I'm using, how long I'm letting it sit, like in each specific step, trying to weigh out and like figure out like what, how much I'm adding of each hops or any adjuncts or like spices, like, the list goes on and on, but trying to keep track of it and trying to nail my process down so that when I do create something, it's like, okay, I did this right, or I did this wrong. I need to change this. And almost like, kind of bring it back full circle. It's just like fantasy football. How we analyze fantasy football it really does come down to what's your process for doing it. How do you approach playing this game? If it's just picking random players or whatever and seeing what comes out afterwards, then we'll be fine. But for me, as I've played and as I've analyzed this game, like over the years, it really has become, well, what is my process for doing this? Like, what is my process for starting players, picking players, so on and so forth. And if you understand that, and then you look at your team, like after the week's over and it's like, okay, I messed up here, messed up there. It's the decision process that kind of creates wins and losses. And the same thing with beer. What's that decision-making process that helps you create a good beer versus a bad one? And that's really kind of what's driven my interest over the years.
Oh man, I like that. I love the way you tied that together. It's like, hey, I'm looking at the ingredients, I'm looking at my lineup. And part of the question was selfish because I know that at some point in the near future, you're coming out here to the East Coast, and
oh yes,
me
sir.
and you are going to connect, and I am going to head up to Vermont, and I'm going to pick up my favorite IPAs, and me and you are going to do a little tasting, and I'm going to show you kind of where my vibe is because I know you like the West Coast IPAs, but I'm going to show you how the East Coast does it right, which isn't going to be a Sam Adams. It isn't going to be some kind of trash that you're going to get elsewhere. It's going to be the stuff you can only get in Vermont. I'm going to bring some of that stuff back down here, and me and you are going to have a beer day. We're going to do some tastings. We'll break those down. Oh, it's going to be something, and we're going to see if we can change you from being a West Coast IPA fan to being an East Coast IPA fan. I think I'm going to be able to get
about it.
I love it. Now, of course, you know me. I have one passion in the world outside of football, and that is sandwiches. And I always like to hear from people. Like, sandwiches are one of those things that you say you eat with your eyes, but a sandwich is going to look relatively similar no matter how you get it. But everybody has had like a sandwich in their life that they remember. I had a Cuban in New Hampshire that shouldn't have been there, and it was the best Cuban I've ever had. Like, I still think about this sandwich 10 years later. Because it just hit me right. Like, I was hungry. It was a surprise. Like, everything about this sandwich came out well above what I expected. Now, let's say, hey, me and you hanging out, we're drinking beers, and we're going to get some sandwiches. Hit me with, what are you looking for? Give me your top sandwich. If you have a specific place or a type of sandwich, like, what are you digging for your favorite type of sandwich?
So my favorite type of sandwich, to be quite honest, is anything that's essentially like the classic Italian sandwich, because, well, like I was describing, like I eat with my eyes, like I want to see all these different types of meats, like from capricola, pepperoni, ham, and like you see like the different colors of meats like stacked up like on that sandwich. Throw on a little bit of some red vinegar, throw some onions on top of it so you can just see just all these different ingredients like smashed into this like sandwich. I'm not a huge bread guy, but I can understand like if once you put it on the roll or whatever, it winds up taking up a decent amount of space. But either way, like that's the thing that I'm looking for, just like a massive amount of meat kind of crushed into like this particular sandwich. Now, out my way, I mean, Penn Station is actually like one of the more like popular like sandwich shops like around here, so that's like typically what I get it from. But their classic Italian like sandwich, like with all the meats like grilled up and whatever, with throw some banana peppers on it. I mean, just absolutely perfect like for what I like. And so like that's typically what I try and go for. Like whenever I try and make sandwiches here at home, like my wife will get on my case because I get like super extra whenever I make stuff like this, because I'm adding in like all that stuff. Like I'm trying to get like all the different meats and like bacon and like adding all these ingredients to it, so that once you stack it up and you look at it, it's just like, you know what, like this is a meal right here. Like this ain't a sandwich like right here. This is a meal like by itself. And so like whenever I'm trying to put together a sandwich, or when I go out and try and find one, I mean, that's the type that I'm looking for.
Finally, man, episode 5. It took us to get to episode 5 for somebody to bring up the 101 of sandwiches. Undisputed 101 is the Italian. The perfect sandwich. It is the perfect sandwich. Now, remember, kids, I want you to be safe out there. We want to keep people safe. When you go to a deli, you ask them what meats they put on there. And if they don't say mortadella, if they don't say capicola, you go somewhere else.
Yes.
If they start telling you salami, and I've gone to a place, they've come with something that says loaf. I don't even know what loaf is, but I know you do not want to eat that. You need to hear the accent. You need some guy who barely can pronounce English words, but nails the meats.
Yes.
That's how you know you're in the right place. But
Yes,
trust me,
sir.
man, if it's not mortadella and capicola, you walk out. You are in
Yes.
the wrong place, and you go find the right place. You're around here, you're around Boston, you call me, I'll bring you to the right place. We'll go to my old neighborhood. We'll get you the classic Italian. Man, I literally think that when you're out here, we just planned our whole weekend. We are
I mean,
doing
honestly,
Italian with
like
beer.
there's really nothing else we have to do. I mean, we've got it all planned out.
It's going to be the best day ever.
Yes,
Like,
sir.
yeah, I think we might have to live broadcast, like, and just call the show "Best Day Ever," like me and you skipping, like Laverne and Shirley or
Yeah,
whatever, like
just
wandering up.
constantly, yeah, just constant like short videos or whatever of us like at the deli or out at a bar, like doing like beer tastings and all this other stuff. I mean, there's just gonna be constant content for us, like making other folks jealous of how fun we're having.
It's going to be the best, yeah, and that's all we're going to do. And I think realistically, we'll probably FaceTime Troy and show
Yeah,
him what happens. The main event gets to hang out here and we party. The intro gets a video call and say,
absolutely.
"Hey, wish you were here." Maybe we'll bring a picture of him around and like pose with it at all the cool places we
I
go to.
really
But
like that idea. That all right, we're doing that. Like that, yeah, that's definitely happening.
it's going to be awesome. It
Yeah.
is going to be awesome. All right. So listen, they tell me I got to keep this under a certain amount of time. So now I want to make sure you have time. What do you want people to know? What do we have coming up this season? Obviously, it's coming up to what I consider Chris Allen season because the wind's going to start kicking in, the weather's going to start kicking in. That's originally where you and I connected, was talking about the wind in Foxborough Stadium in the open area the last time we did a podcast. But
Mhm.
what do you have coming up, and what do you want the people to know?
So when it comes to weather narratives, and we actually just had a couple of them like pop up over this past week, specifically with the Browns game, where folks saw that the winds were going to be around 20 miles an hour, and everybody kind of looked back at the two bad weather games that they had in Cleveland last year, what it was against the Raiders and the Texans, if I'm remembering correctly, weeks 8 and 10, if I'm remembering that correctly as well. And they're like, okay, win games, we can't expect deep passing. It's going to be more on the running game. Kareem Hunt's about to go off. I mean, it's that's what's going to happen. And what happened? What two deep passes to Donovan Peoples-Jones, like
Mhm.
like with Baker Mayfield also having a busted shoulder, like didn't seem to affect Kyler Murray as well. I mean, so I don't know what to tell y'all. But I think the big thing though that I always try and preach is that when it comes to weather narratives, like we really need to pay attention to the extremes, not anything
Mhm.
that happens to be over 15 miles an hour, even around 20 miles an hour, where folks typically start to get concerned. That's really when I start to wake up. Like I will start to pay attention once it gets around 20 miles an hour. But other than that, I do not care. And I try, but the thing is, I say I do not care. But if you read any of the work that I do on a daily basis over at 4for4, I put together the weather report for each week, and I ramble on for about like 1,000+ words over why you shouldn't care. So like while I keep it succinct here, it's more of I'll break down into the science of like why there's no concern like for any particular week, and especially for at the at the highest level, it's is weather actually doing something to change the game? And I think that's the question that we really need to answer. I don't know if folks like might have happened to seen it, but I put together just this quick thread last week because, and this no shade, not throwing any shade whatsoever, because there are tools out there available through Fantasy Labs, and other folks have done studies that have shown what the fantasy point production are like per position that happens like once the weather starts to kick up past 15 miles an hour, past 20 miles an hour, and so on and so forth. But the thing that I question about data that's like that is that fantasy points are results based. It's how many yards did that person get, how many touchdowns that person get, how many targets they get, so on and so forth. And while that's all great and everything, but it doesn't answer the right question, especially for quarterbacks, because quarterbacks being so reliant on throwing touchdowns, if we happen to see any change in their fantasy output, the answer to the question that we're really asking or answering is, did they happen to throw a touchdown during that particular game? Which that can happen. I mean, they can wind up throwing a touchdown, they can wind up handing off the ball, and it can be a rushing score. So by saying that quarterbacks and their scoring can oscillate, like from, I think it was Graham Barfield had put up the tweet, and they and quarterbacks happen to drop by 1.8 points if the weather happens to be over 15 miles an hour. And again, if it's just 1.8 points, one, that means that's less than a passing touchdown, which means that really we're only talking about a few yards, like here and there, which means nothing. And that's the question that we really need to ask. Like, if the weather is changing how a team approaches the game, then we would be able to measure that. And one of the things that I've looked for over the years is, where do the passing rates like start to change? Because that we can measure. Because we know what teams we can measure the intent for a team by looking at things like neutral passing rate, passing over expectation, passing once they get into the red zone, so on and so forth. And in those types of games, like where we're only looking at 18, 19, 20 miles an hour, they don't change. They don't significantly change. But it's once we got to the extremes, when it was 25 miles an hour in Cleveland last year, when it was 35 miles an hour in Cleveland last year, that's when passing rates change. That's when we can measure the change, measure the change in intent for each of the offenses. And we saw that play out in the production they had. What was it? 10-7, I think, the Houston game last season. Yep. So it's just, that's where we can start to measure intent. And that's where the intent matches up with the production. Otherwise, it's just easier for us to look at the two offenses and how they might interact, the two, like the offense with the opposing defense, how they might interact, and just approach the game as we normally would, versus saying that, well, on top of all these things, all these other variables that we have a tough time projecting on a week-to-week basis anyway, trying to also loop in the factor of weather, it makes it too difficult. And leaning on narratives like high winds are going to cause short passes or less passing, so they're going to lean on the running game, all of that stuff only comes into play once we get to the extremes. Everything else, we should look at how we were going to approach that game from a normal standpoint anyway. Like, again, going back to the Cleveland game, if we were already more psyched about Kareem Hunt in that game anyway, play him. Everybody wanted Kareem Hunt from a daily fantasy perspective, even from a season-long perspective, because Nick Chubb was going to be out. Baker Mayfield was injured. The passing game really wasn't working because Odell Beckham and Baker Mayfield weren't really connecting. So we were already leaning towards Kareem Hunt being the play anyway. The weather was not going to change that. And the same thing for the Arizona passing game. Like, we wanted to see more from Rondale Moore. We were expecting, and he already had a lower ADOT. So if you were going to play Rondale Moore, you were already predicated on, you were already thinking that Arizona was going to lean more on the shorter passing. So it's just all of the plays that we had for that particular game already lent themselves to either a good, they were already lent themselves to being plays without having the weather involved. So unless we get into those extreme measures, it's easier for us just to look at that game as if it were being played in a dome. So, and unless there's heavy rain, like week 7, 2019, when it was Washington against San Francisco, there's this absolute downpour, like Bosa and Kittle sliding around on the field and all that stuff. Like, unless it's like that, or unless it's like the 35-mile-an-hour winds that we saw in Cleveland last year, just focus on the game as you typically would, and then just let the results come as they may.
So what I love about the way you explain that and the way we talked about the numbers and stuff is, I see this a lot with narratives. And what always drives me crazy about narratives is when you're not using them as a tiebreaker, but you're using them as a decision maker.
Right.
And to me, I think you hit the nail on the head when you talked about the metric that Graham had, the 1.8 fantasy points. Now, your backup, realistically, is probably projected for 5 to 8 less points than your starter, unless somehow you manage to, draft maybe 2 quarterbacks in the same tier. But when you're dropping back down, you're risking more than you stand to gain. And I see that a lot with any narrative. I see that a lot when you talk about weather, when you talk about some of these folks that are doing 0 running back or robust running back, where you're now reaching down a tier to prove your point. And it's not that your theory is wrong, it's that your execution is wrong when you're taking a wide receiver 2 instead of a running back 1, or vice versa, because your results are different. And then people look and say, well, I didn't get the results I wanted. It's like, no, you should lean on the fragility of a running back if that's what you believe in, as a tiebreaker, but not a decision maker. And too often I see people falling into the former category, and that usually is, suicide for a fantasy team when you start saying, oh, instead of going with Kyler Murray, I'm going to roll out Ryan Tannehill. Well,
Right.
man, unless it's a typhoon, you done messed up. Like, what were you thinking?
Right.
You never should have done that in the first place. Like, you just shouldn't have. And to get what? Maybe Kyler goes 1.8 points less. Like, let's even double it to 3.6. He's still going to have more than Tannehill in the long run.
Right. Yeah.
So what were you thinking with that move? But you see it. I know, especially for you, I'm sure you get more questions you can imagine that are those kind of oddball. Should I start this guy who's been trash all season over my MVP because it says it's going to be windy that day?
Yeah, and I think that's where folks try and lean on those narratives a bit too much. And it's like, well, what are your other options? Like you just mentioned, it's not like we were even considering benching a guy like Kyler Murray, but Baker Mayfield was already off the radar as a quarterback start for that week anyway.
Mhm.
So it's not like we were considering Baker Mayfield, even from a daily fantasy perspective. So anything that, like, any narratives that would have been attached to that passing game, like, we weren't going to be considering anyway. Donovan Peoples-Jones, like, was a, I guess, off the board, like, type of play, like a Millie Maker type of play. And so that's where folks would consider him. And look, he wound up paying off, especially for a couple. I thought he was on the winning Millie Maker roster. I could be completely wrong.
He had to have been.
Yeah.
Had to be.
Right. So it's just those types of narratives can wind up actually taking people off of plays or off of the correct plays, when it's just look at that game as a whole. Like, look at that game without any sort of narratives attached to it. And how would you approach that situation in that game and environment if weather wasn't a factor? You're playing Kyler Murray. You're likely, at the very least, playing DeAndre Hopkins, maybe taking a shot at any of the three ancillary players in Kirk, Green, or Moore. Maybe toss in Chase Edmonds, but I think he was dealing with an injury coming into that game as well. And then on the flip side, for the Browns, we weren't really touching Baker Mayfield. Most folks were only starting Odell Beckham if they absolutely had to because of buys or whatever. And then it was all about Kareem Hunt. And that's it. I mean, that really was it. Like, those are the plays, and weather did nothing to change our stance, like, on those. So even if it was 20 miles an hour, which it opened at 22 or 23 miles an hour and then completely dropped off, which is what I saw in the forecast and I wrote in my report anyway. So weather being not a factor at all, everything played out as we expected it to, at least from a usage perspective, at least from a passing rate perspective. And then after that, it's just football from a week-to-week standpoint is chaotic anyway. So the results might have been different than what we expected. I definitely didn't expect to see Donovan Peoples-Jones with 2 touchdowns, but it's just, did anything change about how the teams approach the game? If the answer is no, then we shouldn't care about it either.
Love it. All right, man. I could sit here and talk to you all day about football. You know that. Last time we went like 2 hours, man.
Yeah, we were up. How late were we at up in Canton, man?
Oh, it was too much, but we had a blast, and I cannot wait. I know everyone thinks this is probably a bit, but absolutely, me and you are hanging out in Boston soon, man. I cannot wait for it to happen. So listen, if you guys are not following this man, the coolest, smartest dude, honestly, the person you want to chop it up with about anything fantasy football related or life. You heard him talking about beer, food, football, weather, everything. This man is a renaissance man right here. Chris Allen, FFWX on Twitter. Make sure you follow him. 4for4 Footballguys, 32-bit, which we covered, NBC Sports Edge. You can find him everywhere. I don't know how you find the time, man. I don't, but I can tell you how much I appreciate you spending some time with us. It has been a blast. Next week, we're going to continue with 4for4. We're bringing South Pal. Sal Stefanel's coming in next week. So we're going to continue with the 4for4 gang, one of my favorite brands, some of the best people out there. Chris, man, thank you so much for hanging out with us tonight. It's been a blast, brother.
I mean, my gosh, man, I'm so happy for, the platform that DLF has provided to you. All love to Ryan and the rest of the partners. So happy seeing you flourish. I mean, you need me back here on the show. You want me back here on the show. You just tell me when and I'll be here, man. So happy for you.
Oh, you know you're coming back. I legitimately will always take the opportunity to chop it up with you, brother. Thank you so much. I'm going to have Gabe take us out of here, and I'll catch y'all next week. Have fun.
Get down. Turn on the pod cause we looking at live right now. Peeling it back, take a quick look inside up. All of these analysts, daddy gon' handle this. Know he's a baddie, I know he ain't bad at this. We gon' lay back, talking irrelevance. Why do all that? Just for the